right, so Nintendo.
I've heard about this Nintendo thing. It's kind of like Atari, right?
Kind of. So let's talk about console generations.
Yeah.
The first console generation, I believe, was Atari 2600, probably the Magnavox Odyssey.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if there were any other players, and then there was the console generation 2, which I assume was Atari 5200, along with probably Intellivision, maybe they were in the forefront, and also ColecoVision, maybe. I don't know. I'm not really sure because I didn't pay attention to those console generations because I was playing my games on the Atari computer. But then the third console generation happened, and the third console war, and we have the Nintendo Entertainment System, released in the United States late 1985, though it really didn't get a nationwide release until 1986. This is a fully 8-bit console, came with 2 controllers. Depending on how you bought it, you might get the little Rob toy robot for the game Gyromite, and it also might come with Duck Hunt, where you would have the gun, the zapper gun, and shoot the ducks on the screen. And if you missed, the little dog the basset hound would laugh at you.
There is a great analog horror on YouTube about that.
Oh, really?
Or is it a video? Is it a video game itself? I forget. Yeah, it's you play as a kid who is playing Duck Hunt, and very, very scary bad things happen if you shoot the dog.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, basically, Atari had said after the video game crash, we're done with video game consoles. We're focusing on computers. The video game console thing is dead. Nintendo and Sega of Japan kind of looked at each other, and then they started racing because they said, now we can get in on this.
Yeah.
Nintendo beat Sega to the punch with their Nintendo Entertainment System, known in Japan as the Famicom, stands for Family Computer. And Sega, they beat out Sega. Actually, to be fair, the Sega Master System had better graphical output slightly, but Nintendo still beat them to the punch. And Nintendo actually did approach Atari over here in North America, said, hey, would you like to distribute the NES in North America under the Atari name? And Atari said no. In fact, I think, what's his name? Sakura Iwata, who I believe eventually became the president of Nintendo, he had actually programmed Joust for the NES and showed it to Atari. Look what you can do on the NES. You can bring your latest game, Joust. And they're like, no. We will release our own console, and that console was the Atari 7800.
Mm-hmm.
Look at that. Beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah, I didn't have one of those. I still had the
Nobody had one of those. That was the point.
I stopped with the 2600.
This could play 2600 games. It was backwards compatible.
Oh, that's nice.
And ironically, the Atari 7800 has been was re-released last year in a high definition format, and you can buy it, and you can buy reproduction cartridges. In fact, they even made Berserk and Frenzy cartridge for the Atari 2600, so it'll work on the new system, or if you have an old Atari 2600 lying around your house, you can play it around on that as well. So
yeah, I don't need any of that stuff. I had a buddy who bought me a present this year. It was a little handheld thing. It's got all those games on it.
Well, that's the thing. If you like Atari, there's plenty of ways to play Atari. Yes, I got you that Atari handheld.
Mm-hmm.
But you can also get the Atari Anniversary Collection for major game consoles now, which comes with tons and tons of classic arcade and console games if you want to relive the glory days of Atari. And this was the... hold on. Where is it? Why can't I go forward? Can you hear me?
You should be able to, yeah. You try here. I'll take it forward for you.
Why don't you go forward while I figure out
Sega Master System?
Yes. Page unresponsive. Wait. Okay, there it is. Okay. Thank you. There we are. Sega Master System. This was the Sega's competition. This game was very popular. This system actually was very popular in Europe. So it did well over there. Didn't make a splash in North America, though. Not really popular. The NES ruled the roost. This console became very popular in South America, especially Brazil. People were playing this game system, I think, into the early 2000s. That's how popular it was.
Oh, there you go.
Nintendo won the console war. Nintendo were tyrants. They had a stranglehold on third parties. Said, you want to make a game on one of our competing systems? Well, maybe you don't have to make games on our system. They were rather ruthless. Now let's move on to the second console generation. You want to do the slide? Maybe I can do it. Hold on. There we go. Super Nintendo. Now you're playing with power, superpower. Look at this. Well, it is kind of an ugly looking console, I'll admit that. They had some American designer design the North American version, and that's what he came up with. Whereas Europe and Japan got like a more traditional top loading game console, right? You see this thing?
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of weird, huh?
Yeah,
But
I guess.
it is what I grew up with. I had to save my piddly allowance for months to get this thing. But I did. And it came with 2 controllers and a copy of Super Mario World. Look at that. Main competitions were the Sega Genesis. Remember Sega?
I remember Sega. At least I had a friend who had it, yeah.
Now, Sega did something very smart. They came out with the Sega Genesis in 1989 for Christmas season, 2 years before the Super Nintendo in North America. And by the time the Super Nintendo came out, Sega had actually secured a lot of third-party support. So they actually were getting a decent library. We had someone who could actually compete with Nintendo. They had their own mascot character in the form of Sonic the Hedgehog. You may have heard of him, right?
Oh, yeah. Actually, that's the only game that I ever played on that console. So.
Well, they had a lot of other games, too.
I know.
Some games came out on both.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like there was a Star Trek The Next Generation game that came out on both Sega and Nintendo. Do you remember
I don't. What was it called?
Star Trek The Next Generation something. But what was neat about it...
something is the important part.
Well, I don't know, Trials of Time or something. It was like something to do with time, I'm sure. Anyway, they always would stick time travel in these things. But what was neat about it was when you would load the game up, the Sega logo would kind of like it was in a transporter field. It would
cool.
Yeah. Out. It was kind of neat. And it was also on the Super Nintendo. But the point is, Nintendo had some real competition on their hands with the Sega Genesis in North America. The other big 16-bit console was the TurboGrafx 16.
I've heard of that.
I had one of these, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
See that Too Cool for School kid on the cover there, huh? That's how all kids in the early 90s looked, just so you know, all boys in America. They all had that slick back hair. They're excited because they have their
I was getting married at that point.
Okay. All right. So this is the TurboGrafx 16. Not as big a deal in North America. It was known as the PC Engine in Japan. In Japan, this was Super Nintendo's main competition was the PC Engine. Sega was not really popular in Japan, even still. So, but this kind of flamed out in North America, the TurboGrafx 16. I had one though, and I have a bunch of cartridges for it. They're now worth a pretty penny because it was a rare console. So that was the 4th generation console war. Who won it? It's always hard to tell who wins these things. People think that Nintendo finally edged Sega out with the release of Donkey Kong Country toward the end. But it was a close call for a while. Now we move into the 5th generation console war, the Nintendo 64. You hear of it?
I've heard of that one too, yeah.
Okay. This came out in fall of 1996. This was the hot Christmas item of that year. This was the only game console I've ever bought at launch. I actually pre-ordered it and went to Toys R Us and picked it up with a copy of Super Mario 64 and Pilot Wing 64. If you look at the top, you'll see Mario Bowser. I think the one on the left is a character from Killer Instinct. I think that's Fulgore. And on the full right, you see a Stormtrooper, don't you?
Yeah.
And labeled underneath was Nintendo 64 The Fun Machine. They were advertising Shadows of the Empire. That was an exclusive Star Wars game they had on the Nintendo 64 to coincide with that book that came out. And I think did they also release an audio drama as well, I believe, for Shadows of the Empire?
Yeah, I think so.
So
they
that was
figures.
Okay, yeah. So this was a big thing. Okay, Sega Genesis had Star Trek The Next Ray started in Star Trek Voyager. I think that Deep Space Nine game came out on both. It was rather weird how that happened because early on, Nintendo basically told companies, you want to release one of your franchise games on another console, that's fine, but it has to be a different game. You can't just port over the Super Nintendo version. So Konami, instead of porting over Super Castlevania 4, they just made a whole new Castlevania game for the Sega Genesis. Yes, GoldenEye was the big hit game on Nintendo 64. First, it was Super Mario 64. The following fall, you had GoldenEye, based on the Pierce Brosnan James Bond movie. The following year, you had The Legend of Zelda: The Ocarina of Time. Nintendo
I have
was
played
very
that
good
one
at,
as well. Yeah.
yeah, Nintendo, great. Yeah, that involved time travel too.
Yeah.
You could
You
could
had to
actually
play
go
you had to play a particular tune on the ocarina too.
to go back and forward in time, and it was neat because when you would go forward in time, you would be aged up to an adult, whereas in the past you'd be a child, right? You'd be childlike,
Right.
so it was like you were going back and forth. And when you go into the future, horrible things have happened because the villain won, right? So
Yep.
But what's cool about that game is you can actually set things up to foil the villain in the past and fix the, and set things up from the past to pay off in the future, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, this was the Nintendo 64. Its main competition though was welcome Connie Cleary. Always good to see
Connie.
you. All right. And of course, we all know what Nintendo's main competition was this generation. Go forward, the Sega Saturn. Sega Saturn crashed in the United States, North America, and Canada as well. This system did not succeed over here. I don't think it succeeded in Europe. It did succeed in Japan. For some reason, Japan, they ignored the Master System, the Genesis, but they hopped onto the Sega Saturn. They did like this console. It was the Nintendo 64 in Japan that they didn't like. Prompting the president of Nintendo at the time, Yamauchi, to comment that Japanese gamers are lonely men that like to stay in their bedrooms all the time. Because they didn't buy the Nintendo 64, which was a system that was very popular at like frat parties for its multiplayer, because you could hook up 4 controllers to it. The big winner of this generation was, of course, the Sony PlayStation. When Sega came up with their Sega CD add-on, Nintendo says we're going to come up with our own CD add-on for the Super Nintendo, prompting people that might have wanted that CD-ROM technology to still buy a Super Nintendo. And then Nintendo decided, nah, we're not going to release the CD add-on after all for the Super Nintendo. Ha ha. The company that was going to make the CD add-on for the Super Nintendo was Sony, and they were going to call the CD add-on the Nintendo PlayStation. Basically, Nintendo had shown Sony all their secrets. Sony was hopping mad that they didn't get to develop this add-on for this Super Nintendo, and basically, screw you, we'll make our own console. So, hence the PlayStation. PlayStation was a huge hit all around the world. #1 console. Couldn't do 3D as well as the Super Nintendo, though. This was a 32-bit console. Super Nintendo was 64-bit. Nintendo 64 was 64-bit, but it was hampered by the fact that Nintendo still used cartridges. PlayStation used CD-ROM. You could put as much information as you wanted on a CD-ROM. If you ran out of room, you just put another CD in the set. Whereas cartridges, you can only put so much information on them.
True.
Anyway, so a lot Sega with blackjack and sexy ladies. Yeah, well, it was late 90s. Okay, turn of the century. Now we're into the 2000s. In 2001, Nintendo released the Nintendo GameCube, their follow-up to the Nintendo 64. I will eventually do a complete GameCube retrospective, because
that
this
doesn't
console
look like
was
a
hated.
cube. That looks like a trapezoid.
Okay, stop with the comments. It's a cube. If it's a cube, if Nintendo says it's a cube, and it had a little handlebar in the back, it was actually very portable. If you wanted to bring it over a friend's house, very easy. Welcome, Orville Nation. Good to see you. I'm giving Troy a history lesson on the console wars. I'm trying to speed this up because we got a lot of news to talk about. But I figure Troy doesn't know what we had to endure as
sure
gamers.
didn't. I had a PC.
PC
after
yes.
my Atari 2600. I went to Commodore 64, then PC, and it just was PCs from there.
Well, now would be the time to become a console gamer, Troy, because consoles now represent all the worst aspects of PC gaming with a few exclusives.
Yeah, no, I won't be doing that.
It's like they're hampered PCs with a few exclusive. I'd rather just game on a Steam Deck. That's what a lot of people are saying.
So it's like the worst of all worlds, is what you're saying.
Well, yeah, but we'll get into that later. But this is the Nintendo GameCube. I still love this Nintendo system. It might be my favorite Nintendo console. It had some stiff competition, though, in the form of The Sony PlayStation. Sorry, this is a later model PlayStation Slim. The stupid PlayStation. This is a PlayStation 2 Slim. The PlayStation 2 regular, the stupid box was all black. You couldn't even see what it looked like on the cover. So this is a PlayStation 2 Slim. Same system, though. And this was the big popular game console. Why did Sony win this console generation? They released their console a year before everybody else. Their only competition was their only competition was Sega's last attempt at a console, the Sega Dreamcast, which promptly bowed out before the GameCube and a new console, a new fighter in this war, the Microsoft Xbox. You can't see the console too well on here, but it was a very large game console. From what I heard, it could crush a small child if it fell on it. Okay, it was a very large. The GameCube was weird because how the extra part can add the GameCube, including special Resident Evil 4 chainsaw controller. I never got the Resident Evil 4 chainsaw controller. I probably should have in retrospect. They had it on pre-order at GameStop. I remembered that. And I did get Resident Evil 4, though. I had that on pre-order when it came out. GameCube had a lot of cool exclusives on it, like Metroid Prime, Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker, and a few others. They had Resident Evil exclusivity until Capcom decided they didn't have Resident Evil exclusivity anymore. So much for contracts. But it's just love the PS2. The PS2 era had so many great games, and this just shows you. I love the GameCube, but a friend of mine, he gave me a PlayStation 2. He won at a work Christmas thing, so I ended up buying a bunch of PlayStation 2 games and building up that library toward the end. And I have to admit, as great as the GameCube was, the PlayStation 2 might have been a little better. That's how good a console generation this was. You were never hungry. You had tons and tons and tons of games to play, all varieties. You were never bored. Well, guess what? Good things come to an end. Now we get into the next generation, which is the Nintendo Wii.
Wii!
The Nintendo Wii. The Nintendo Wii, how I hate thee. I will say that Nintendo was struggling, and if they had failed with this, they would have been out of the console business. But this was a huge success. I remember when this came out, people were waiting in line for this and the PlayStation 4, I believe. They came out the same year. This time around, Xbox had beaten Nintendo and Sony to the punch by releasing the Xbox 360 a year earlier. This is the Nintendo Wii. The big draw was the Wiimote, which gave you motion controls, shipped with a game, Wii Sports, and you could actually, bowl with, go bowling and, play tennis with your little Mii characters you made to look like yourself. And big hit at retirement homes. Grandma loved it. Everybody loved it, except for some of us Nintendo fans. And then you had the Nintendo fan diehards that would yell at you for complaining about it.
I will say about this that I didn't have this myself, but the office that I worked at had it in the rec room, and I got really good at bowling and golfing with this thing.
Okay. Like I said, people loved it. I remember the Wii. Here's my big problem with the Wii. This is Nintendo, in my opinion's most underpowered console. Their competition are releasing high-definition game consoles for high-definition TVs. Nintendo felt the high-definition TV thing wasn't going to take off, and they released a standard-definition game console focusing on motion controls, so a lot of games had to utilize these motion controls. That's the Wiimote. You could also hook a nunchuck analog stick up to it so you'd hold it in both hands, and you could also get a classic controller plug into it if you wanted to play games the old-fashioned way, but not all games use the classic controller. This console was nothing but frustration for me. And keep in mind that Nintendo kept this thing on the market forever. They kept a standard definition console on the market past the point they were making standard definition televisions. I could buy a Wii, and then I couldn't go into a store and find a proper TV to play it on. People would just hook these things up to the new HD TVs. They would fling the Wiimote at the TV when they were bowling because they thought, I have to let go of the ball. And then the Wiimote hits and cracks their new HD TV on the screen. This happened.
That's dumb. That is just dumb.
Nintendo eventually came out with these straps you could put on the end of the remote and tie to your wrist. So if you let go of the remote, it would still be attached to your wrist. They realized later on they had to come up with a solution to that.
You can't fix stupid. You really can't.
Yes, but were there any lawsuits for that?
I wouldn't
No.
be surprised if there were. But I mean, that's like the cat jumping at the TV trying to catch the bird on the screen.
Yes. Well, I have picked on the Wii, but there were still some great games on this. You got not one, not two, but three new Super Mario games. One was a 2D Mario game called New Super Mario Brothers Wii. And some people believe Nintendo came up with that title because they figured someone was going to go into a store and ask, "Do you have the new Super Mario Brothers for the Wii?" So we'll just call the game New Super Mario Brothers Wii. Get it?
Oh my gosh. Yeah,
Crickets.
why
Okay.
not?
Okay, Super Mario Galaxy was a new 3D Mario game, but really cool because it was you would go to all these different planets and you would have to solve puzzles, and it was like a Mario game based on gravity. It was neat, and they did
Oh,
two of
that's cool.
those.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was actually a super cool Mario game, and they had other games for this too. My favorite was House of the Dead Overkill by Sega, which was basically a video game version of that Grindhouse Planet Terror movie. And apparently, that game made it into the Guinness Book of World Records for having the most F bombs in it. So, isn't that interesting? Oh, the PS3 was okay, but blankety blank. I could never find the special gun controls for the game, like Killzone 3 and Call of Duty World at War. I don't know. I'm just thinking. Are you thinking of that? I know that Sony released a motion controlled adapter thing with the glowing knobs on top for the PlayStation 3. Let's talk about Nintendo's competition. PlayStation 3. Sony got very arrogant at the beginning of this console generation. They released this thing on the market and it was prohibitively expensive. I don't know how much it was. I meant to look that up before the stream. I want to say, but it was a lot more expensive than the PlayStation 2 was. And people were slow to adopt this, even though Sony was touting this thing is not just a game console, but it can play Blu-rays too. Those new Blu-rays that have just come out, But eventually, they released a cheaper model later on called the PlayStation 3 Slim. I did actually pick up that model because the Wii was frustrating me at some point, and I wanted to play Batman: Arkham Asylum, and that wasn't on the Wii, so I ended up picking it up for that. And the PlayStation 3 Slim was cool, and it actually got me to start buying Blu-ray. So I'll give it credit for that. $299.99 was the PlayStation 3 Slim. The killer this generation was the Xbox 360. This basically wiped out all competition. I was actually on the fence of getting this over the Wii in the beginning. I was over a friend's house and he said, "Oh, I'm on my third Xbox 360." Or maybe the fourth, maybe I think it was the fourth Xbox 360. He says, "What do you mean?" "Well, I've gotten that red ring of death." And I'm like, "Oh, wow, you must have gotten really unlucky for you to get that many bad consoles." No, it turns out the Xbox had a problem of releasing malfunctioning consoles, and you'd have to
Oh
send it
my
back to
gosh.
Microsoft to get fixed. And I think someone at Microsoft did the math. We could either restructure or do a whole redo of the console, or we can just pay for the repairs for the people that bothered to send it back in, and that's actually going to be cheaper. Really sleazy. I'm sorry,
Man.
but still the most popular console I think of that generation. Though some people argued that the Wii was most popular because it outsold, and then I think PlayStation 3 eventually catches up toward the end of that console generation when they released cheaper models. Plus, they had exclusives like the Uncharted games, and I think toward the end that game called The Last of Us. Moving on to slow. Nintendo
Looks like
decides to
a
release
Wii pad.
a Wii U, their first high definition game console, comes with a touch controller. Um, Shigeru Miyamoto is obsessed with having two screens. The guy that made Mario. This goes back to the Game and Watch days. I'm not even talking about Nintendo portables yet. That'll be another discussion for another time. But this is
Looks like Jesse
they decided,
Guajardo
yeah.
has quite. Looks like Jesse
What
Guajardo
on
has
this?
quite a library of PS2 games and PS4 games.
I have a lot of PS2 games too. One of my favorite PS2 games is actually Burnout 3: The Takedown. I don't know if you have that one. I would look into picking it up if you didn't. That game was all about crashing your car. Let's be honest, when you play a racing game, you just want to crash your car, and they decided, let's just build a game around that. Thank you so much. I think it was Criterion Games made that. Beautiful game by EA, back when EA made games I wanted to play. But here we
Mm.
go, the Wii U. This thing came out, and oh my goodness. I don't want to say it flopped hard. It flopped hard. Oh my goodness. People said that people were confused. They thought it was an add-on for the Wii. They didn't realize it was a whole new console, a Wii successor. I've heard that
Oh
argued.
gosh. Yeah.
I was looking into getting it, and I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
The only game that looked appealing to me was Rayman Legends. That was supposed to be a Wii U exclusive, and then Ubisoft announces, "Oh no, it's coming to Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3." Well, I have a PlayStation 3, so I'll just get Rayman Legends on that. So I didn't bother
Yeah.
picking. I didn't bother picking up a Wii U. Oh no, this thing did terribly. Nintendo was really hurting at this point, and Nintendo basically had to admit we made a mistake. We're basically we got to cancel this. They never did this before. They usually would wait at least 5 years before throwing a console, even one that was not as successful as they wanted. In the case of the Wii U, I think it was like 3 years. They're done. We got to bring something new to market. That new console to market was the Nintendo Switch.
Yes.
And this is where we are, kind of getting into our modern times. And I know now console generations become confusing because people would argue, well, no, the Wii U was part of the blah, blah generation. No, I'm calling BS. I think I think that the Nintendo Switch's main competition were these two. People are going to argue with me. I don't care. Agent Boomer, looks like Nintendo forgot about the fact they make Game Boys. Oh, I know. I almost thought about talking about the portables, but we're already going on too long as it is. We'll
Yeah.
do portables another time. Xbox One. This was Xbox's big console. They were kind of the losers last generation. I had an Xbox though. I actually picked up an Xbox One S from Walmart as a deal. Came with Minecraft. You know Minecraft? It's kind of been in the
I
news
do.
lately.
We're gonna be talking a little bit
One
about
ninety nine
Minecraft
ninety
later.
nine. A next gen console, $199.99. That was an incredible steal. It's not, it wasn't the most advanced version of the Xbox One, but heck, for $199.99, that was a good deal. And then there was the PlayStation 4. I actually have a PlayStation 4 Pro. I got the special Spider-Man edition. It's kind of cool because it came with Spider-Man the game. It was a cool red console. It came with Spider-Man the game plus all the DLC. They give you a free season pass for it as well, and you got a red console with the Spider-Man symbol on it with a special Spider-Man controller, and that was $399, I believe. Yes, if memory serves, or was it $299? No, it was $399. That's right, because of course it was also a 4K Blu-ray player, and it could do a lot of other stuff too. Uh, but Nintendo Switch did really well because it couldn't play Blu-rays or DVDs, but it was actually a portable and console in one. So you could take it on the road with you, or you could hook it up to your TV. Those little Joy Cons, you could hook them up to the controller or remove them and use them like Wiimotes. Remember the Wii?
I
They actually
do.
released a Nintendo sports game for it where you could redo the bowling. Maybe I should pick that up. Relive the glory days of the Nintendo Wii bowling, right?
I enjoyed it. I
It's
can't say
fine. A
what
lot of
you would
people did.
enjoy, but
I'm just. What I enjoy is shooting zombies with the Wiimote. That's what I enjoyed, okay?
okay. No, I could see that too. I just never got a chance to try that. Yeah.
Oh, man, the Nintendo Wii. The two Zelda games for it. One was a GameCube port of Twilight Princess, and I preferred playing it on the GameCube. The other was Skyward Sword, which I didn't like at all. But anyway, I got my PS4 Pro. Been all right due to the fact I could still use physical media based game. There's a lot of stuff available on the PS4. They're still making physical release games for it. Lester San Jose, if you were ever interested in picking up the Lunar games that were popular on the PlayStation and Sega CD, they're releasing a special Lunar Remastered collection on Amazon exclusive. It's going to be for PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and Nintendo Switch. They're going to release physical edition releases of these two classic Lunar games remastered in high def. So if you want to pick that up, if you're into Japanese RPGs, I recommend that. They go on sale April 18th. But now we are at the Nintendo Switch 2.
Yeah, I've been hearing a thing or two about that recently. Yeah.
To be continued, but I wanted to get Troy up to speed. Basically, but I wanted to give you some history lesson behind Nintendo. Nintendo's history is a history of highs and lows. They do well, then they don't do so good, then they almost get kicked out of the console race, then they bring it back. It's very strange.
The little
Do you know how much
company that
do
could.
you know how much you could get a GameCube for when it was struggling? Nintendo was selling them for $99.99. Sometimes they would
Wow.
give you a game with it. And then
Wow.
their console games, they would come out at $49.99, but then if you wait a few months, they'd become what we call a player's choice game, $19.99. And then you go
Wow.
down to Circuit City for the 2 for $30 sale. And then you could pick up Metroid Prime and The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker for under $30. Times have changed.
Times have really changed. We're going to get into that tonight, let me tell you.
To be fair, Sony and Microsoft did the same thing. They would release best greatest hits of their games for like $20. Really neat. Here we have but the Nintendo Switch. But I want to bring up Nintendo Switch 2, and as far as I'm concerned, their main competition now is PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, which looks like something out of a Doctor Who episode. But what do I know?
It does, the little rondelles, exactly.
It's actually shaped like a tower, and that's supposed to be where the fan stuff comes out of on the side, and you could.
So it's still not shaped like a box.
It isn't, actually. That's why I didn't pick one up. I'm happy with my next one. It's funny. This is the last generation was the only time in any console generation I bought all three consoles, and I bought games on all three consoles, and I loved all three consoles. Even the Xbox One, it got picked on, but it still had a great selection of games. Most of the big third-party games come out for it. There were some cool exclusives, like a lot of those rare remastered games were on the Xbox One. I mean. Yeah. It was a great console generation last time. And I guess I wanted to bring up a point that we have great console generations, and then we have not so great console generations. And I think we are currently in a not so great console generation. Not that this matters to you, because
console generation. We're in a not so good gaming generation all around. We're in a not so good general entertainment era right now.
Yes. My biggest complaint of the PS4 era was that it was short, and most of the same games were watered-down versions, the Japanese versions, and no English dubs, which make it annoying. I know there was a big problem with Sony actually interfering and kind of bullying some Japanese developers with the sexy ladies in the games, too, which annoyed me, which I blame on the whole woke stuff. F the current era of game consoles. Okay, Jesse Gardo.
No, well, don't like hold back. Tell us what you really mean.
That doesn't leave you anywhere to go. Okay, and make sure. Okay, Japanese version games when it comes to the PS4. I mean, yeah.
I'm inclined to say. I'm inclined to say that if you've bought any or all of these game consoles, you've got them. You can still play those games. I'm not sure that's entirely true of some of the more recent generations, though.
Well, we're going to pretend that we do own those games as long as the console works and you have them downloaded. Or if you have the physical copy, which probably about half the game is on the disc. I'm sorry, let's move on to later news.